How do greenhouse gases affect the Earth's atmosphere?
For a short review, weather versus climate. Weather is the state of temperature in present time, while climate is the change in climate over a long period of time. The greenhouse effect is harmful gases trapped in the atmosphere that warm up the planet.
In Experiment 1, the carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere, we learned what the carbon cycle is, which is the natural cycle of which CO2 is recycled in the Earth. Lately, in the 21st century, we as humans have accumulated over 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which the normal limit is 300. The leading countries today that cause this is China, the United States, and a couple of others. And as of 2008, the U.S. lifestyle puts detrimental strain on the planet by individual Americans per year by generating 20 metric tons compared to the world's 4 metric tons by Science Daily. This is mostly due in part by the agriculture, which is 60% of methane gas emissions into the atmosphere. One way we can reduce this number of 400 parts per million is by eating less meat, recycling plastic water bottles, and converting to solar and wind energy, which allows less carbon dioxide to be emitted into the atmosphere. And now on to Experiment 2 on the carbon footprint.
In Experiment 2, what is carbon footprint? Carbon footprint is how much CO2 is produced due to the amount of fossil fuels used. Carbon footprint is basically based on the electricity used, which in turn produces more fossil fuels burning, which allows more CO2 to be produced into the atmosphere. What we can do to reduce our carbon dioxide levels is minimize driving, meaning instead of depending on our vehicles so much, we should travel by foot once in a while or by bike. We need to stop relying on electricity and technology so much. Next is Experiment 3, 4, 5 with Sanaya.
In the dissolving egg experiment, a piece of an eggshell was placed in 25 milliliters of vinegar. We then allowed the egg to sit for an hour and 1 full day. We took notice of the egg and its qualities/shell at the beginning, after an hour, and after 1 day. In the beginning, the eggshell was firm, white, and transparency was non-existent. After an hour, we noticed the eggshell became softer and smelled faintly of vinegar, though it still remained its color of white. Finally, after 1 full day, the eggshell was completely soft, stunk of vinegar, and the transparency was evident. The eggshell was slimy and felt like wet paper. Additionally, the size of the eggshell became smaller each time we took a look. The CO2 in the air around the egg caused it to break down, alongside the fact that it was in vinegar. In our acidification experiment, we placed 25 milliliters of red cabbage juice in each cup. One cup was labeled control and the other was labeled CO2. To put the CO2 in the cup, 2 group members were to constantly blow into the cup for 5 minutes each. Each team member blew for 5 minutes, coming to a total of 10 minutes. So if you want to try this experiment, have someone do it with you. After we finished blowing, we noticed a change in the one in which we blew in. The CO2 from my breath caused the red cabbage juice to become a lighter color than the one we did not blow into. We can conclude that due to the additional carbon absorption of the ocean, as displayed in the experiment, it has been shown that this is the main cause to the acidification of the ocean. In our carbonate versus non-carbonate experiment, we had 2 plastic cups of water and 2 smaller cups with 15 milliliters of red cabbage juice inside of them. In this experiment, we put the smaller cups inside the plastic cups of water, careful not to spill. Then we added Alka-Seltzer to one. The one with Alka-Seltzer was carbonate and the other was not. We then covered each with plastic, and a rubber band was placed around this plastic. We then took turns swirling the cups. Eventually, we stopped swirling and found that the carbonate was lighter. We can infer that the Alka-Seltzer and the fact that it was covered caused the carbon to automatically come back down because it had nowhere to go. and affect the color of the juice. Carbon dioxide affects the atmosphere because it causes the atmosphere to become absorbed with it. This can lead to an unhealthy and dangerous situation for humans in general. And now on to experiment 6 with Rocio.
The global climate increases, the amount of polar ice decreases. This decrease, resulting from the melting of ice, affects sea levels. As land ice melts, the sea level rises. This is expected to have the most damage on coastal areas. Impacts include coastal erosion, higher storm surge flooding, increased loss of property and coastal habitats, as well as can harm agriculture and aquaculture. In our experiment, ice was placed on top of a clay inside the container to demonstrate land ice. And sea ice was demonstrated by just placing ice inside the bucket. The land ice should have demonstrated a higher sea level rise than the sea ice one, but the results for our experiment had a flaw and it came out incorrect. Ways to reduce the impact of sea level rise for coastal regions include building a seawall and investments in shoreline protection. Common misconception questions about global warming include: how can global warming be real if the winter this year is so cold? Also, the statement, there's nothing we can do about it anyways. The misconception that how can global warming be real if the winter this year is so cold? The reason for this could be the location. In the year 2006, Lake Erie did not fully freeze. This caused for a harsher winter because due to the lakes not freezing, there was more precipitation due to moisture. Global warming leads to harsher weather conditions. The statement, there's nothing we can do about it anyways, is also incorrect because there's many things that you can do to help resolve this issue. One of the ways would be to green your commute. This includes using public transportation, biking, carpooling, or investing into an electric or hybrid vehicle. Also, using energy wisely. This includes using energy-efficient light bulbs, unplugging electronics when not in use, washing clothes in cold water instead of hot water, and looking for products with the Energy Star label. Another way can be to winterize your home to prevent heat from escaping, and buying organic and local produce.
According to PMEL Carbon Program, when carbon dioxide, otherwise known as CO2, is absorbed by seawater, chemical reactions occur that reduce seawater pH. Carbonate ion concentration and saturation states of biologically important calcium carbonate minerals. This is known as ocean acidification, or OA for short. Ocean acidification impacts seashells, crustaceans, mollusks, and coral reefs because it causes them to become weaker and eventually die off. The acid affects the seashells because they no longer have a barrier that protects them from predators. They become weaker, and this decreases the amount of them to a point where they are scarce. The organisms who then feed upon these coral reefs and seashells will have to find another food source, or else they will die off due to ocean acidification. Is dangerous to those who rely/live in the ocean because their home is becoming more deadly and the amount of food they can consume is decreasing, until eventually the ocean is so acidic that there are no longer any more organisms in the sea. For example, there will be less fish in the sea.